The news now on BBC One with Darren Jordan.
Nurses take on the government, warning thousands more NHS jobs will go. Unions claim patient care is suffering, but ministers reject talk of a crisis. A new tape from Osama bin Laden talks of a long war against the West. Praise for the Queen's calmness and serenity at a special birthday service. And happy Hammers. West Ham reached their first FA Cup final in 26 years. Good evening. Claims that thousands more jobs will be lost in the NHS have been rejected by the government. The Royal College of Nursing says 13,000 posts will go and has warned patient care will suffer. The Health Secretary, Patricia Hewitt, denied there was a crisis and said the NHS had enjoyed its best year ever. Our health correspondent, Brandon Jeffries, reports.
Nurses say they're under pressure. Their union says they feel under-resourced and unappreciated. And they're warning that job cuts mean patients will receive poorer care.
What we believe is that if there are not enough nurses to provide care to patients, that patient care will suffer. And we also know that patient services are being cut. And we don't see any new services in the community for the patients. And so we're very concerned about what's going to happen to the patients.
The RCN claims 13,000 NHS posts have been earmarked for closure since October. The government disputes this, but up to 7,700 job cuts have been announced in the past 2 months. The RCN says its survey also shows 60% of senior nurses are worried they don't have enough staff to provide proper standards of care.
That would be long-term.
Today, Patricia Hewitt defended her claim that this has been the best year yet for the NHS.
The point that I'm making is that we've got already about 200,000 more staff, including nearly 80,000 more nurses, than we had in the NHS in 1997. There are a small number of staff, including some nurses, facing redundancy.
But NHS staff are angry, say their unions, and opposition parties believe the government is in denial about the problems.
Just wondered what planet she was living on. In the last month, there are, I think, 9,000 people who've been threatened with losing their jobs in the NHS. We've got hospitals threatened with closure in the NHS.
The fact that the Secretary of State for Health, Patricia Hewitt, can say that this isn't a problem and that the health service is doing well is quite frankly bizarre. She needs to get into the real world.
Caring is at the very heart of all that we do as nurses.
But nurses say they're no longer able to do that. They feel demoralised and angry. Half the record investment in the NHS has gone on pay, but with thousands of job losses already announced, many here fear more are on their way.
Bronwyn, how credible are these claims that 13,000 jobs will be lost?
Well, although they're disputed, the RCN says this evening it's standing by its figures because it comes from information from nurses working in hospitals in the community. But the government says those figures are entirely misleading and that redundancies will be confined to a small number of hospitals. Now, those are points that Patricia Hewitt's expected to make in a series of speeches this week defending the government's health policy, both here at Bournemouth, but also tomorrow at the Unison conference in Gateshead.
And how strained are the relations now between the health unions on the one hand and the government on the other?
They're more tense than any time since Labour came to power. After years of record investment in the NHS workers are now facing the possibility of job losses, with thousands already announced. So tomorrow at the Unison conference, I expect their leader, Dave Prentice, to say he'll back his members if they want to take industrial action. And next month, both unions plan a mass march on Parliament to make quite how clear they're angry about these cuts in services.
Bronwyn, thank you for that. American intelligence officials say they believe a new audio tape from Osama bin Laden is authentic. In the tape, broadcast by the Arabic television station Al Jazeera, the Al-Qaeda leader accuses the West of a crusade against Muslims and tells his followers to prepare for a long war. Our security correspondent Gordon Carrera reports.
Surfacing on Al Jazeera today, the voice of Osama bin Laden. The audio tape is the first we've heard of the al-Qaeda leader for 3 months.
This is an ongoing war against Muslims. The enemy continues to murder our children, our women, the elderly, and destroy our homes.
Bin Laden hasn't been seen in person since this video more than a year and a half ago, and today's tape is designed to show that he's still relevant. In this latest message, Bin Laden raises 3 specific issues. He says the cutting off of funds to the new Hamas government in the Palestinian territories is proof of the West's crusade against Islam. He calls for the trial and punishment of those responsible for the cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad and a boycott of Western products. And he calls for opposition to any intervention in the Darfur region of Sudan, where there has been talk of sending troops to deal with a humanitarian crisis. Taken together, this is all designed to maintain his profile and show he is still around.
Osama bin Laden want to prove to everybody who wrote him off that they were wrong. He's still alive, he's still kicking, and he's still trying to manipulate the situation in the Middle East to his own sake.
Bin Laden is believed to be hiding in this mountainous region bordering Pakistan and Afghanistan. The fact that he's releasing an audio rather than videotape is most likely a sign that he remains worried about being caught. But Western intelligence agencies say they don't discount the ability of al-Qaeda's leadership to plan and carry out fresh attacks. Gordon Carrera, BBC News.
There's been more violence in Nepal after tens of thousands of anti-monarchy protesters defied a curfew imposed by the king. Police held them back using rubber bullets and tear gas. Opposition leaders claim Nepal's king will be overthrown within days. From Kathmandu, Nick Bryan reports.
Sunday afternoon in the once tranquil kingdom of Nepal. When the ring road encircling the capital became a fiercely contested front line. Yesterday, crowds entered the center of Kathmandu, trying to reach the gates of the royal palace. Today, the police were determined to keep them on the tree-lined fringes of the city.
They're advancing up the ring road, trying to push back the demonstrators and using tear gas and plastic bullets to do it. Over here, they've just fired.
Up until now, the king has been able to rely on the unflinching loyalty of his security forces. They're the main instrument of his autocratic power. This was the 4th day running that protesters flouted a shoot-on-sight curfew. They want the immediate recall of Parliament and an elected assembly to decide the future of the monarchy. Further inside the capital, we witnessed other expressions of the king's authoritarian rule. A monarch pitted against his people, with no resolution in sight. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Kathmandu.
The Queen has been praised for her calmness, serenity and her ability to give the nation heart at a Thanksgiving service to celebrate her 80th birthday. She was joined by other members of the royal family at the service in Windsor Castle. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
On St. George's Day, in the chapel that bears his name, and that is the parish church of Windsor Castle, a family service to give thanks for the 80th birthday of the Queen. All the members of the congregation were there at the express invitation of the Queen. Among them was Earl Spencer, brother of the late Diana, Princess of Wales. In his sermon, the Dean of Windsor spoke of the example the Queen had set all her life, of occasionally turning the other cheek, of never succumbing to self-pity, and of always putting duty to her country first.
And in a world in which we often feel confused and buffeted by so many changes, your conveying of a sense of calmness, serenity, and stillness through your person help us to understand that real human beings need to be deeply rooted if they are to flourish.
The congregation sang the Easter hymn, Thine Be the Glory, during which a collection was taken for local hospices. And yes, the Queen does carry money. A family at worship, giving thanks for a remarkable life. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News, at Windsor Castle.
New guidelines on the best way to measure babies' growth are to be issued by the World Health Organization. In future, the ideal weight will be based on breastfed babies rather than those who are formula-fed. It will add to the debate about the best way of feeding newborns, as Daniel Bircher reports.
Baby Nancy has progressed to solid food now. As a newborn, she was breastfed. During regular development checks, though, Nancy appeared light for her age, according to charts that plot average weight. A concern for her mother, Rachel, but she felt the problem lay not with her daughter's weight, but with the charts.
She was a healthy, thriving, breastfed baby who got very ill very seldom because of all the benefits of breastfeeding, but was being flagged up as a problem because she wasn't fat.
Charts are based on figures that, until now, have included babies fed on formula milk, which may gain weight more quickly. Now, the World Health Organization is expected to bring in a new international standard, using instead figures gathered only from breastfed babies. So, will that mean changes here? A baby's weight is monitored over time, and the results are plotted in a book like this with charts tracking progress. The Department of Health says it will consider the WHO's new recommendations before deciding if charts like these need to be reviewed. And there has already been pressure for a new form of assessment.
The older charts made it seem as though babies who were being breastfed were growing slower than they should do. We now realise that that is wrong.
It doesn't work.
Whether parents choose breastfeeding or formula, this is about how their baby's early growth may be monitored in future if these new standards are accepted. Daniel Bircher, BBC News.
Now with news of West Ham booking their place in the FA Cup final and the rest of the day's sport, here's Chris Hollins. Chris?
Thanks very much, Darren. Good evening. West Ham are through to their first FA Cup final in 26 years. They beat Middlesbrough 1-0 at Villa Park. They now face Liverpool at the Millennium Stadium on May the 13th. Here's Andy Swiss.
Middlesbrough and West Ham's trophy cabinets haven't exactly been overflowing recently, so this FA Cup semi was always likely to be tense. And it was. A first half of few chances, but one very notable incident. A clattering for Borough keeper Mark Schwarzer, which left him with a broken cheekbone. The second half, thankfully, was better, as West Ham belatedly hit their stride. Dean Ashton so nearly put them ahead, but the match was ultimately decided by one flash of inspiration. Ashton's flick found Marlon Harewood, and his left boot did the rest. It was the sort of moment every striker dreams of, the perfect blend of power and placement, and a lot more stylish than his manager's celebratory jig. Middlesbrough, though, refused to lie down, and deep into injury time they should have equalised. But Chris Riggott showed precisely why he's a defender. And moments later, it was all over. Not perhaps the most gripping semi-final of all time, but for West Ham, that won't matter a jot. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Don't forget you can see extended highlights of that game over on BBC Two. Now, Alex McLeish's last Old Firm derby in charge of Rangers ended in a goalless draw against the champion Celtic. Dado Pershaw came closest to breaking the deadlock, but Arthur Burdock pushed his header onto the post. Rangers are now 4 points behind second-place Hearts as they chase Champions League qualification. It was a case of lucky 13 for Michael Schumacher at the San Marino Grand Prix. That's how many races he's had to wait for a victory. But that long wait is now over as the 7 times world champion won in Imola. The Ferrari driver led from pole position to cross the line ahead of Fernando Alonso. Britain's Jenson Button was 7th. Now, over 33,000 runners pounded the streets during today's London Marathon. Amongst them, a bride and a groom who somehow find time to get married. En route, as for the slightly more serious runners, Dina Castor won the women's race and the Kenyan Felix Limo took the men's title. James Monroe reports.
It's one of London's great spectacles when much of the capital comes to a standstill and tens of thousands break into a jog. And at the front, some of the world's best battle it out. Felix Limo out sprinting his Kenyan teammate Martin Lell to take the men's title. In the women's race, Dina Castor of the United States took advantage of the absence of Paula Radcliffe to win comfortably. But for thousands of others, time wasn't everything. Like Kate Austin and Gordon Fryer, who got married halfway through their race. And five-time Olympic gold medalist Sir Stephen Redgrave, who raised a record £1.5 million as part of a £5 million charity campaign. Another gallant knight toils on. Lloyd Scott is dressed in armour and hauling a £200 steel dragon. He won't cross the line until the end of the month.
You did it! For every one of these athletes who's finished the London Marathon, there is a sense of elation and achievement, because by completing such a gruelling race, they know they've taken part in one of sport's great events. James Munro, BBC News on the Mall.
Finally, Munster have beaten Leinster to reach the Heineken Cup quarter-final. They play Biarritz in Cardiff next month. That's it from me, Darren.
Chris, thank you for that. Let's get the latest on the weather now with John Hammond. John.
Thanks, Darren. Ideal running weather today. Dull, damp, cold. Whereas further north across the UK, it was a smashing Sunday. Lots of sunshine. Tomorrow, most of us will have a decent day, and nearly all of us will see something of the sun. The last of the rain dying out gradually from southeast England. Clearest of the skies further north. It will be a chilly one for Scotland. Northern counties of England could see a touch of frost. Not only frost, I think if we add in a bit of moisture too, we could well see some fog patches forming, particularly across the Vale of York. One or two quite thick patches here first thing in the morning for the drive to work. This is 8 o'clock, and some of that fog extending down towards Lincolnshire, the East Midlands as well. Very grey and murky still across East Anglia and the southeast. But any rain will be on its last legs, dying out quite swiftly, I think, through the morning, so a drier story. But that cloud's going to hang around for a while through the morning, certainly. Extending westwards into southwest England, signs of that cloud beginning to break up across parts of Devon and Cornwall, and certainly for Wales, the further north you go, the better chance of waking up to a sunny start to the day. For Northern Ireland and Scotland, yeah, it'll be cold, but it'll be bright and sunny. The breeze will be picking up, though, and things will deteriorate here. Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, the cloud will increase, but it's going to take all day before this rain finally arrives by around about evening time. Meanwhile, the cloud does break up across the south and east of England, so some sunshine to look forward to. And as a consequence, it will feel a little bit warmer. Most places getting up into the mid-teens. As we go into Tuesday, the rain pushes out of Scotland and to England and Wales, but never quite reaching the southeast. Darren, back to you.
Thank you, John. Now, before we go, a reminder of the main news tonight. Claims by a leading nursing union that 13,000 NHS jobs will be cut have been rejected by the government. And you can see more on all of today's stories on BBC News 24, including Happy Birthday to the Bard, as a festival showing every Shakespeare play begins. But from Chris and from me, good night.
Good night. Happy birthday.